Now, income inequality is going to ruin your daily commute. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, the New York Times brings to you another one of the shocking, tragic consequences of income inequality in this country. That is, of course, the growing number of people who have decided to use helicopter travel to fly over the massive traffic jams in the New York metropolitan area. Bill, this is clearly in the first paragraph. It says this is how income inequality affects even the basic commute. More people who can afford to do so are flying over it all, looking down their noses at the people who are stuck in traffic jams. And what's happening is, it used to be if you wanted to take a helicopter in a city like that, you'd have to charter a helicopter. It could be like $1,500 to $2,000. Now, their ride-sharing services are developing so that drastically reduces the price. But still, it's going to be a couple $100 for you to take a flight from downtown, let's say, to the airport. And some people are looking at it and saying, hey, my time is valuable. I'd rather have a 5-minute or 8-minute flight than spend 2 hours sitting in traffic. But Bill, clearly the city is all of the people. It is this whole massive collective of people who should learn to work together. Why is it right for somebody to just kind of separate himself and literally rise above the rest of the people so that he can get to the head of the line?
I suppose it's superfluous to point out that with 40,000 airline flights every day in the United States, there's always somebody looking down at somebody. But what really is at core of the issue here, and I'm quite convinced of this, is the person who is writing this article is genuinely upset that the cost of helicopter service has come down to the point where ordinary people can afford to do this on some sort of a semi-regular basis. This is what the problem is. They'll tell you that the problem is that the poor don't get to take helicopters, but what's really bothering them is if the average working guy, or when I say the average working guy, I'm talking about the average working guy in New York, if you're talking about a helicopter ride that costs $200, $300, something like that, there are instances where that kind of cost is worth the money. And this annoys our aristocracy very much. Scott, I don't remember if it was you or not, but somebody was telling me that one of the great things that is so disgusting to the elites of this country is that a Coca-Cola costs $1 a can for everybody. That no matter how wealthy or powerful you are, the hoi polloi, the peasants, the serfs, get to drink the same stuff you do. And this is unbelievably annoying to people whose entire lives are dedicated to setting themselves up above other people. And so if a regular Joe can get in a helicopter and fly for a couple blocks and save himself some time that he really needs in that particular case, then that's what's bothering these elitists, not the fact that other people aren't flying, because the elites, as he points out, have been flying since there's been helicopters. And what this article is basically saying is, now that more and more people can fly, it's worse for the people. You see what I'm saying? What they're saying before, the only reason they're talking about this is it's an income inequality issue. Well, what the entire reason for this phenomenon is that the price of doing this has come down to the point where more people can do it. It's actually meaning more people are flying rather than fewer, and this is why this person is annoyed. This is why this person has inverted their own argument. If their argument is that flying helicopters is so expensive that it's not fair to the people on the ground, and then we find out that this story is based upon the fact that because of ride sharing, prices for helicopter rides have fallen to the degree when many more people can take a helicopter, it completely voids the argument and reveals the true cause of the argument, the actual emotional driver of the argument, which is that helicopters are stuff for people who went to Harvard Law School and who work in the top of skyscrapers at the New Yorker and CNN and all the rest of it. That's what the problem with them is.
Well, Bill, clearly, I mean, maybe it's because you live out there by Hollywood that you're not able to identify with the little guy, the guy who is stuck in traffic in his car, the guy who's trying to hail a taxi, the guy who is going into a stinking train station.
Living in Los Angeles means that I'm utterly incapable of understanding what it's like to be stuck in traffic. Living in Los Angeles exempts me from any kind of sympathy for being stuck in traffic. I see the point of your argument, Scott, and I'm just struck by the logic of it, but please do continue.
But seriously, there are a lot of the wealthy people who basically say, hey, I can afford to do this. Why not? Meanwhile, down below them, some 3,000 feet, there are people looking up at them saying, look at that SOB. I'm stuck here sweating it out, or I'm running to catch a train. It's going to take me 2 hours to get to work. Why is it that some people are entitled to this kind of treatment when I have to be down here? Can't you at least identify with those people?
First of all, I'd be willing to bet you a large sum of money that if you're talking about the poorest of the poor in New York City, they're not looking up at the sky at helicopters. If they're feeling that kind of envy, they're not looking up at the sky at helicopters. They're looking at the Mercedes-Benzes and the limousines and so on that are splashing mud onto their shoes. So this idea that the huddled masses are looking up at their sky gods, flying over them, is another invention of the people who are upset that this has become available to more people, and they're looking for an excuse to say that this is a bad thing. So I don't believe it. And more to the point, the entire reason that America is as successful as it has been, and this is changing, and this is why we're here trying to change it back, is because the idea of America and the idea of Americanism, the American dream, the whole thing is something like this old saw, and that is one person sees a guy driving a magnificent car down the street and says, that son of a bitch should not have the right to drive a car that nice. But the American idea sees the exact same thing, and that American poor person says, one of these days, I am going to drive a car just like that. If you don't understand the difference between these two positions, then you don't understand this country, you don't understand freedom, you don't understand capitalism or anything. The one thing that people constantly talk about is income inequality. But what they don't talk about is output inequality. And you cannot make any sense of the income inequality argument, which is in fact, income inequality is in fact not only not unfair, it is the only thing that is fair in our society. Now, people who hear this on the left, how can you say such a thing? I'll tell you how I can say such a thing. If you're telling me that two people who were born on the same year, identical twins even, and one of them does not, get them out of New York if you want to, one of them does nothing but party, chase girls, drink a lot, all the things that make life worth living, in college, high school, all the rest, and then goes on and gets a job as a clerk in 7-Eleven because he spent his entire teen years and 20s smoking doobies out by the dumpster. If you're telling me that that person deserves the same salary as his twin brother or sister who from the age of 4 started to develop the discipline and the habits to learn, excel, come first in their class, get a straight A average, get a scholarship into a top university, come out of there with a medical degree, do 4 more years of internship and then another 5 years of study and so on, to the point where they can become a brain surgeon and save the lives of little girls who've been hit by trucks. If you think that these two people deserve the same compensation for their work, then you are a cruel, nasty, immoral, vicious, envious bastard, number one. And number two, if you really genuinely think that you can enforce that person and that person getting the same salary, I'm taking extremes here, but it's the same argument. If you really genuinely think that these people deserve the same salary, the same compensation, and you make sure that they get it, then what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that more of the 7-Eleven clerks are going to become brain surgeons, or do you think more of the brain surgeons are going to become 7-Eleven clerks? No disrespect to brain surgeons or 7-Eleven clerks. I have a high regard for anybody who works in this country. I treat everybody with as much respect as I possibly can, and I have no intention whatsoever of sounding like I'm degrading the person who's behind the counter at 7-Eleven. They do important work just like everybody else does. But the reason that there is an income inequality gap is because there's an outcome inequality gap, and the outcome inequality can be explained in a very, very, very simple way, Scott. That is simply this. The brain surgeon can do the job of the 7-Eleven clerk, but the 7-Eleven clerk cannot do the job of the brain surgeon. And it's just that simple. It's a question of scarcity. It's a question of skill. If it turned out that these jobs were both as difficult to master as each other, then you'd see a much closer parity on their salaries. But the fact is, there are a large, large, large number of people who can become 7-Eleven clerks. Again, no disrespect to these hardworking people, but there are very few people that can actually operate on a living human brain and save a person's life as these bruises and contusions begin to spread, know exactly what they're doing. And because they're rarer, and because they are in more demand, and because they have a skill set that is very difficult to achieve, they have not only got the right to command more money, we have a moral obligation to pay them more money because of the sacrifices that they have made in their personal lives in order to achieve that skill level that benefits everybody.
Bill, let me bring another couple of factors into the discussion, because it's not only the income inequality that so rankles the New York Times, but there are other hazards related to the helicopter flights that are now essentially commuter helicopter flights. And by the way, at the three major New York City airports, at Newark Liberty, at LaGuardia, and at Kennedy, traffic, helicopter takeoffs and landings at two of those airports have risen between 20 and 25% during the last year measured. And at Kennedy, for the first 5 months of this year, they're up 84%. So basically, at one airport, you got 1,000, at another airport, 2,000, at another airport, 4,400 takeoffs and landings are happening. Bill, the noise of a helicopter adds substantially to the sound clutter, so to speak, of an urban area. And the danger of one of these birds dropping out of the sky is clear and present to the people underneath. Shouldn't there be a lot more government restraint upon the freedom of helicopter ride-sharing services to protect people from the horrible caterwauling of the rotors, as well as the danger of having one of these drop on your house?
Well, this is where, unfortunately, for your super liberal, we know in real life you're mild-mannered Scott Ott, a reporter for the Daily Planet. But the problem with this argument on the part of progressives is twofold. First of all, they're at a bit of a disadvantage when they're going to make these arguments with me, because I've done two things that they probably haven't done. I've spent some time on the streets of not only New York, but other major metropolitan areas. And I'm a helicopter pilot. I'm not a licensed one, but I've got 20 hours in helicopters. I can hover, and I do have 1,000 hours and an instrument rating in general aviation. So let's deal with the sound issue first. To say that helicopters make life in New York City unpleasant because they make it louder is an argument made by somebody who has never walked on the streets of New York City in their lives. So I'm going to assume that the people at the New York Times who have actually made that argument do in fact walk the streets of New York and understand how specious this argument is. The street level sound in New York City is a roar. It's a roar 24 hours a day. It's the city that never sleeps. There's never a moment in New York when you are sleeping where you will not hear car sirens and constant beeping of horns and all the rest of this stuff. So saying that there's a new level of sound is not something I'm much convinced by. As a matter of fact, when you think about the protections that have been put in place over the last several years in terms of some of the things that OSHA and these agencies accomplish are worthwhile goals. And one of them is to reduce the sound impact of jackhammers and all the rest of this stuff. But if you're trying to tell me that New York City is this kind of, this kind of meadow out in the woods that now it's like it's being Yosemite and all of a sudden a helicopter flies overhead and you're deeply disturbed because of the noise, spare me. I've been to New York City. I was born in New York City, not proud of it, but nevertheless it's true. And that is just plain nonsense. Now, the safety issue is a different issue. I am the son of a hotel manager, and that meant that I got to be, my father was friends with other hotel managers. My dad started in a hotel. He started at the Roosevelt Hotel in New York in 1958, I guess, just before I was born. And I think his last management job was at the Taft. I want to say it was around 1980, 81, something like that. Both in Manhattan. When I was a young boy, I lived in New York until I was just before my 4th birthday, and we came back and visited pretty much every year. And one of the things that my father used to love to point out to me was what was once called, and is no longer called, the Pan Am Building, which at the time was a pretty spectacular looking 60s kind of a space age design. And the Pan Am Building was exceptional, my father told me, because you could take a helicopter from the airport and land it at the Pan Am Building downtown, and you just get out of the helicopter and walk away. And these flights were very infrequent because helicopters in the early 1960s were not what they are today. And one of them finally did crash. And it spilled a lot of fuel and rotors and parts, and these things fell down 60, 70 stories, whatever the Pan Am Building is, and they eliminated helicopter flights over the city for some significant length of time. I'm quite sure about this. I'm not 100% sure, but I have a high level of certainty about this. That the Jet Ranger helicopter, which is the most popular form of executive commuter helicopter that you see, usually when you see a news helicopter, chances are very good it's a Jet Ranger, but we could take the Jet Ranger, the Bell Jet Ranger, as an example for other modern helicopters. My understanding is that the Jet Ranger helicopter has the lowest fatality rate of any aircraft in the sky, certainly of any general aviation aircraft. Their safety record is astonishing because a jet engine is really pretty simple. If your argument is that we have to stop this because the helicopters are going to be raining parts out of the sky, that is not an unreasonable argument, but you're going to have to make the case first. If you really, really, really want to see what a limited amount of airspace can support in terms of helicopter activity, you really need to go to the Grand Canyon. You really do. I went there for the first time back in April, and I'm a guy who's been around airports my entire life, and I was jaw-dropped, astonished at the number of helicopters I saw at any given time. There were 100 helicopters there, and they're all flying the same route, and they're all in the same airspace. And as it turns out, I can't take my private airplane, which I used to own anyway, and fly over the Grand Canyon precisely because there was a terrible accident over the Grand Canyon, like the one in New York, where two aircraft collided. And so a system was put into place that allows this helicopter traffic to function with pretty much perfect safety record. And if you think that the helicopter traffic coming out of Kennedy is a big deal, I defy you to go to New York, to go to Las Vegas and stand there next to McCarran Airport, and you watch the number of helicopters that are coming out of McCarran Airport to make those trips out to Hoover Dam and then onto the Grand Canyon, and they are constantly coming in and out of arriving and departing jet traffic, and it's all done not only efficiently, but essentially with a perfect safety record. So if you're going to make the argument that these pieces of helicopters are going to be raining down all over people, I'm sorry to say that you're going to have to show me some evidence that this is going to happen, and not one, by the way. You know, we are every year, every day that goes by, we add another day to the biggest winning streak that I'm aware of ever. It's, you know, you talk about sports teams that haven't lost in 7 years or 8 years or something. The United States of America has 40,000 commercial flights every single day, and there has not been a fatality among an American jet, a major carrier, since 2001. That's nearly 20 years.
And that one was intentional.
No, actually, sorry, it wasn't.
A different one?
There was one, I want to say it's 3 or 4 weeks after 9/11,
okay,
where an American Airlines aircraft overcorrected the rudder. It was an Airbus. The rudder came off, and it went down into a New York neighborhood 3 weeks after 9/11, needless to say. But that was the last time that people have lost their lives in an American jetliner, and that was in 2001. 40,000 flights a day, I'm probably underestimating that, for 18 years. And no one has been seriously injured. There might be some microscopic number of people who are taken to the hospital for a broken bone because of turbulence. It's an astonishing record. And to say that if something happens to tarnish that, if we will, obviously, it's going to happen. If a jet crashes and we're going to say, well, that's it, we got to stop. We got to stop jet travel because this horrible accident killed 300 people. Then you have to realize that if that's going to be your position, you do not live in the real world. And the real world is an interesting and fun place to be. And the more you know about the real world, the more fun it becomes. And as you learn the lessons that the real world is going to teach you, whether you want to learn them or not, or whether you do learn them or not, if you're willing to listen to what the real world is telling you, you and the real world will start to get along much better. And there's no better case for this ever in human history than in commercial aviation, where every single airline regulation is written in the blood of innocent people who died because of mistakes that we didn't know were being made until we made them. And of all the things that I am proud of with this modern federal government, which I have so many problems with, I think not so much the FAA. I think the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, is the perfect example of what a government agency should be. They're small, they're lean, they're ready to go. They've got ready teams to go within half an hour of a crash someplace. These guys are on their way to the airport. They don't have a huge budget. They don't have an endless mission. They don't have a standing army. They go out, they do the job, they come back with the findings, and they don't care whether it reflects badly on Egypt Air or American Airlines or Alaska Airlines, whatever. They're not concerned about that. They go out there, they find out what happened, which is a difficult damn task. If you've got nothing but little pieces of debris floating on the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that's a damn difficult thing to do. And they find out what happened, and then they write regulations so that that doesn't happen again. And when you do enough of this, you are able to hit enough of these whack-a-moles so that really now errors that occur are occurring so infrequently that you really do have to consider them flukes. In other words, to complete this argument about safety, we have gone 18 years, as we record this, almost 19 years, without a fatality in an American jet because of the people who died in crashes and what we learned from those crashes in terms of the design of aircraft, maintenance of aircraft, air traffic control procedures, cockpit errors, pilot errors, all of it. We have learned so many lessons from this and paid such a high price for it that now we're finally deriving the dividends and the benefits of it. And to want to take it away because some guy in a New York skyscraper doesn't like the fact that the little people get to fly in helicopters is silly.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is no manifestation of negative consequences for income inequality at BillWhittle.com. If you want to become a member at $9.95 a month, we welcome you to do so. If you want to become a member at $19.95 or $49.95 a month, we welcome you to do so. And every membership receives the same personal benefits. It's just that people at those higher levels of membership are actually helping to fund the enjoyment of this kind of programming for people around the world. And for more people at $49.95 a month. If you're one of those
charity.
folks,
it's voluntary and it comes from the heart.
That's right.
And it's not coercive. And you don't get anything extra. You just do it because you feel like it's important and it's a choice you make. And for that, we're very grateful.
And if you're that kind of person, we invite you to join the team that's already producing these programs, some 48 shows a month, by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking the Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thank you.